All right. Good evening. Welcome to our community's house. We are all guests in it here to serve our community. My name is Mike Little, Mayor for the District of North Vancouver, and I want to welcome everybody here to the Council workshop for Monday, October 25th at 7 o'clock. Council, we have an agenda that's been presented. Are there any errors or omissions from the agenda as presented? Hearing none, will someone move adoption of the agenda?
I'll move.
Moved by Councillor Back, second by Councillor Hanson. Call the question. All those in favor? Contrary minded, motion carries. One item that is in there is the adoption of the minutes for the September 27th Council workshop. I will just say that one of the participants had some concerns about the names of the people that were attending the meeting, and so I'm going to withdraw that item, have the clerk's department check in with them, make sure that it is accurately represents who was a part of that meeting, and then we'll return the item at a future meeting for adoption. Councillor Murray, is your question about the minutes?
Yeah, there was a number of questions I asked. I think there was a number of questions by council and none of those were recorded, and I'm wondering why that didn't occur. I asked several questions to Ms. Fagerland, to Mr. Crow, to Mr. Holloway, and there's nothing in the minutes that shows the recording of any of those questions.
Yeah, and that was noted by the chair of the Housing Task Force. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have staff go over with them what was asked and make sure that we have an adequate record of the meeting.
I think maybe the best way to, sorry, Mayor Little, I think the best way to do it is just to review the tape.
That's what Genevieve Lance, the clerk, has said would be done. So
okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That takes us forward to item 3, reports for council or staff. This is the housing needs report, and it is at a draft stage. At this point, I'm going to refer the matter to Mr. Milburn for initial comments.
Thank you very much, Your Worship and members of council. I'd just like to share my screen briefly. Can you see that, Your Worship?
Thank you. Yes, I can see it.
Excellent. So good evening, Mayor Little, members of council. I'll provide some introductory comments and then ask Ms. Atva and her team to present the draft housing needs report. So why are we here tonight? What's the context? First, in a broad sense, understanding population change and housing need is useful. It can increase our understanding of anticipated needs for land, infrastructure, community facilities, and resources. Second, the province of BC has mandated that each local government must prepare and publish a standardized housing needs report. In particular, the province has established an expectation that local governments consider their most recent housing needs report when developing and amending their housing policies of their official community plan. So every method of analyzing a community's future population and housing demand comes with challenges and limitations. And the approach mandated by the province is no different. In particular, with this type of analysis, we see the following limitations. First, this analysis is a projection based on standardized inputs and extending known historical trends into the future. Furthermore, we know that predicting the future with total certainty is really not possible. And land use planning requires long-range thinking, usually many decades. But change occurs incrementally over many years, all while external forces and internal decision-making may change. Plus, this analysis is necessarily focused on this community, but the agencies that collect and disseminate statistical research, such as Statistics Canada, BC Stats, the BC Assessment Authority, typically work at a provincial or national level, and therefore data is only available periodically or in limited forms. All of this means that the outcomes of the analysis are subject to some volatility and unpredictability. Finally, and probably most importantly, this type of analysis does not tell us what should happen. What should happen is instead determined through a robust official community plan review process, such as the OCP action plan recently approved by council. In particular, the housing needs report does not account for existing land supply, nor does it account for the corresponding future need for transportation infrastructure, most importantly, but also water, sewer, parks, schools, and a range of other services, infrastructure, and facilities. A housing needs report is really only part of the picture, and therefore must be shaped by council policy direction, including the official community plan, or OCP, the action plan, the rental and affordable housing strategy, and in addition to the rental, social, and affordable housing task force final report. So tonight, really the goal is to enable a discussion, to solicit questions and feedback from council on the content and results of the first draft housing needs report. And Mayor Little, with your permission, I'd now like to ask Ms. Atfa, Manager of Community Planning, and her team to present the draft housing needs report for council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. Welcome, Ms. Atfa and your team.
Thank you very much, Mayor Little. Good evening, members of council, and staff, and everybody who's able to join today. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you clearly.
Thank you. My screen was doing some wonky things a minute ago, but I'm glad that we're all good now. I'd like to just introduce really briefly the two other presenters today, Ariel Dali, one of our community planners, who is the project manager for this project, and Matt Thompson from Urban Matters, our consultant, who has helped us get to the point that we're at today. We've got about, 13 slides exactly, should take about 10 to 15 minutes. So just while we're still on this slide, Ariel will change them as we go along. I just want to add that we are talking about the housing needs report tonight because it really is intended to give us another better understanding of our housing needs. And we know that in the district, we've been very focused on housing since my time here, which is a couple of years, but longer than that. And specifically, have been looking really hard at how to address issues around affordability and the lack of housing choice. And council has taken a lot of proactive steps with the OCP action plan. Our housing task force gave us their final report, council priorities, other policies that point us to how do we increase housing diversity and address affordability. And our community has a lot of knowledge about housing and has helped define the actions that council has chosen to take. So this housing needs report, as Mr. Milburn mentioned, is another way to help us understand our housing needs and how we as a community will choose to respond. And I will say we've got some information up on our website. If you go to dnv.org, you can just search housing needs, but there's a newish page exploring our housing needs. Thank you, Ariel. If we can go to the next slide. It was 2019 when the province decided that all municipalities, all local governments need to have a housing needs report done, and gave till 2022 April to do this. Our funding requirements we got a grant from UBCM. Our reporting requirements need to be completed by January 4th next year. And the province set out minimum reporting requirements. For example, the number of units needed over the next 5 years by housing type. And housing type really means bedrooms, number of bedrooms from bachelors up to 3 bedrooms. We have chosen to augment that 5 years by also going to 10 years to 2031. That gets us just really in line by 1 year with our OCP timeframe. The province has also said we need to make key statements about key areas of housing need, and we've drafted those, and also look at core housing need, the number and percentage of households in core housing need. So what I want to also say is that the precise requirements that the province set out, precise requirements around how many census reports to look at, for example, we've done that, but we also augmented this by doing some stakeholder engagement earlier this spring and summer, and also included our additional data that we use all the time as important benchmarks, such as the pace of development. So the housing needs are not everything. They do help tell us what our housing needs could be if our projections about our population hold true. The projections are based on an assumption of historical trends continuing. So that the housing needs tell us what could be, not what should be, but what could be if those trends hold true. What should be is up to council to determine. So as we'll see in the next few slides as we move through this overview, there is a lot of insight and a lot of detail in the housing needs report. So we're meeting the requirements set out by the province. But we also know that some of the really important and interesting tools that we use, such as our housing continuum, the housing needs report in and by itself doesn't change our housing continuum. The housing continuum is really at a finer level of detail. We know it looks at transitional housing, shelters, so the types of social support and market housing. So we know that there's a lot of that work and the housing continuum is really a big interest of the community and big part of our community and ongoing planning discussions. So again, just as I turn it over to Ariel for a few slides, I just want to reiterate that it's been a big body of work to come to this draft report. We are really interested to present this to you. I encourage people to take a look at the report if you haven't, members of the public. There is an executive summary that makes it a little bit easier, and we hope that this will help us to see where we need and want to go as we move forward. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Ariel now.
Thank you, Tina. So we launched the development of this report in April of this year, beginning with data collection and some preliminary analysis. From June through the beginning of September, we conducted community and stakeholder engagement. And in July and August, we delved deeper into the data analysis. We have now arrived at the draft housing needs report that is before you, and we will be bringing forward the final version of the report before the end of the year. I'll now be sharing with you just a few key highlights about our housing profile of the district. In the housing needs report document, you can find a lot more information on the district's population, demographics, its economic profile, and other pieces of our housing profile, as well as engagement findings and our statements of key areas of need. We heard a lot from stakeholders on the need for housing for families, seniors, immigrants, homeless individuals, Indigenous households, and people with accessibility needs. The graph before you shows data from the 2016 census highlighting that the district's housing stock is predominantly single-family homes, with the share of single-family housing being much higher than what we see regionally. However, over the last number of years, we have seen an increase in the share of housing in our compact centers, one of the directions of the official community plan. Another trend we see not shown here is that homes in the district tend to be larger than homes in the region as a whole. In 2016, fewer than 200 households in the district, or about 0.5%, were in studios and 10% of households were in one bedrooms, whereas 70% of our households were in homes with 3 bedrooms or more. Next, this first graph shows the average vacancy rate for purpose-built rental units in the district. It has remained low since as early as 2005. A healthy vacancy rate is typically between 3 and 5%. We have seen an overall rise in the vacancy rate since 2016, but this is likely due to several temporary factors, including a number of units becoming available in 2017 and 2018, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic being linked to temporarily higher vacancy rates across the region due to fewer students and international workers moving here. In the report, you can see that the vacancy rate broken down by number of bedrooms, and it shows that on average, vacancy rates have been lower for studios and 1 bedrooms and higher for 2 and 3 bedrooms. The Cmhc Rental Market Survey reports that the district has just under 1,700 rental units in the primary rental market, which we also refer to as purpose-built rental. This is about a quarter of the total number of rental units in the district. This type of rental is typically more secure and less expensive than units in the secondary rental market, which are units such as secondary suites or condo units being rented out privately by the owner. About 75% of renters in the district live in these secondary rental market units. All in all, just about 20% of the district's residents are renters and 80% own their home. This aligns with the high proportion of single-family housing in the district. Here we can see that the district's average sales price has increased fairly steadily over the last number of years, with the exception of around 2018 or in 2019, which may be a result of various regulations that came into effect, including the speculation tax and stricter mortgage testing. As sales price increase far faster than the median income, the affordability gap grows larger. Here we have data on core housing need in the district. There are 3 primary indicators of housing vulnerability used by Statistics Canada and CMHC. These are whether a household can afford their home, specifically whether they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing, whether it's suitable, which is whether there are enough bedrooms based on the National Occupancy Standard, And is it adequate or in good repair? If a household experiences issues in any of these categories and can't reasonably afford an alternative housing option in their community, then they are considered to be in core housing need. If a household is experiencing one of these issues and spending more than 50% of their income on housing, then they're considered to be in extreme core housing need. The District of North Vancouver's information is on the left of this graph, and it's compared to the region on the right-hand side. In blue, we can see that we have approximately 1,500 owner households in core housing need and about 1,600 renter households. You can see that over a quarter of all renters in the district are in core housing need. Additionally, in the report, you can find additional details on core housing need, including that nearly half of seniors who rent are in core housing need, and approximately 40% of renters who are single parents or living alone are in core housing need. Other renters who experience high rates of core housing need include immigrants, people with disabilities, and Indigenous households. I'll now turn it over to our consultant, Matt.
Thank you, Ariel. So I'm going to walk through some of the projections and the key findings over the next few slides. This slide shows projected household growth in the District of North Vancouver over the next 10 years. The figures on this slide, as has been noted, are derived from the district's OCP, regional population projections that were developed collaboratively with Metro Vancouver, and then the work of Urban Matters and city staff to layer on appropriate household patterns. It's important to note that these figures, and has been noted already tonight, they don't represent a target. They're simply a projection of growth based on historical trends. To that point, you may see that while some of the shorter term trends that are talked about elsewhere in the report are quite interesting, for example, that the bulk of the household growth between 2006 and 2016 took place through renter households, that may not always line up with the way that the projections are structured. And the reason for that is that because we use a much longer time period for determining the averages that are applied here. So if you go back to 1991 or 1986, sort of 20 to 30 years back, then you actually see that over the long term, the growth in households is largely driven by owner households, which is what's reflected in this table here. It's also important to note what these figures are not. They're not a reflection of current need in the community, such as housing to support individuals experiencing homelessness, non-market seniors care, or latent demand for rental. Those needs are covered elsewhere in the report through the key statements of need, but not necessarily sort of deeply dived into through the projections. So this slide shows us that between 2016 and 2031, the number of households in the district are projected to grow from about 32,200 households to about 40,700 households. This means that between 2021 and 2031, about 5,500 new owner households and a little more than 1,500 new rental households would accommodate this projected demand, so a total of more than 7,000 new units. It's also worth noting, as the table shows here, that as of the end of 2020, the district has already approved 2,500 units. Next slide, please. As was noted earlier, one of the requirements of the housing needs report legislation is that local governments use their projections to estimate the size of the units determined by number of bedrooms for the next 5 years. We have projected them out to 2026 and also out to 2031. I'd also like to note that the sizes here are reflective of a slightly more inclusive than maybe captured in the slide. A 2-bedroom would also include 2 bedrooms with dens. 3 bedrooms would also include 3 bedrooms with dens, and a 1-bedroom would include a 1-bedroom with den. This is clarified in the report because especially in the last year and a half working from home, and the access to a den has become increasingly important for many households, not just in the district, but across the region and province. We've developed these 2 scenarios to show a couple of different options of what might happen, again, if historical trend holds true. Scenario 1 shows what households would need if they assumes that they would only access the housing that they would need based on national occupancy standards. That is, households would not purchase or rent housing that would be any bigger than their absolute need as determined by the NOS, the National Occupancy Standards. This is a little bit unrealistic. We know that many households prefer to have an extra bedroom to host guests, or to have a second office, or if it's a couple without children whose children have left the home, they may want to be able to host their children. So we've developed scenario 2, which shows particularly couples with children accessing, being more likely to access 2 bedrooms instead of just studio or 1 bedrooms. So under the national occupancy standards, those households would really only need a 1 bedroom, but many may choose to have a 2-bedroom unit. And so what that shows us is that there's a big jump between scenario 1 and scenario 2, where a number of those couples that would by definition of the NOS only need a studio or 1 bedroom may actually select a 2-bedroom, which is reflected in that higher proportion number of units. It's also really worth noting here that these projections for 3 and more bedrooms are quite high, I think, reflecting the overall status of the District of North Vancouver as a very family-oriented community. So in some of the neighboring communities that we've worked with of the district, we've seen the number of 3 bedrooms projected out being quite a bit lower than that proportionally. Next slide, please. So now we come to just a summary of some of the key findings. So based on these projections, again, if nothing else changes and trends hold true, and no other interventions are made, then by 2031, there will be approximately 2,100 renter households and 1,950 owner households in core housing need. That includes the households that are currently in core housing need, as well as those that would be added through household growth, but again, is based on an assumption of no change or intervention. The projections also show that based on historical growth, over 7,000 new households are projected for the district over the next 10 years. However, considering units that have already been approved but not yet occupied, this means that approximately 4,550 new units are needed by 2031 to fill that gap. And finally, this unit mix to accommodate these new households are projected to be approximately 40 to 60% studios or 1 bedrooms, 15 to 30% 2 bedrooms, and then over a quarter, three or more bedroom units.
Great, thank you so much, Matt. We just have 2 slides left. This one outlines some of the next steps that will be coming. This is our first time in the district completing a housing needs report, so we, along with most other communities, are learning from this. One thing we know that will be really important is new information becomes available. I'm thinking of the 2021 census, that it will be really important to update this work and make adjustments. I think what is really positive good news is though is that what we're seeing from the housing needs report draft is that there's a good alignment with the OCP action plan, for example. That action plan has priority actions around increasing housing diversity in town centers, prioritizing rental, social, and supportive housing, and also increasing diversity in and near our centers. We anticipate that there will be updates to our other important guiding tools, such as our housing continuum, possibly the rental and affordable housing strategy. We got the housing task force final report. So there's a number of really important connected pieces. This housing needs report looks at our needs to 2026 and 2031, and it builds on this existing work regarding the need for various types and forms of housing in the district. And I do think it's a positive contribution to understanding our housing needs and how we can move forward collectively to meet our OCP vision for vibrant and inclusive communities. And the last slide is a recap for the recommendation before you today, that the report from the community planner, the housing needs report draft, is received for information. We really appreciate the time and workshop today to present this to you.
Great, thank you very much for your presentation. You know, it's when going through this report package, which is a pretty substantial report in and of itself, you know, you can't help but think that I wish the timing were better. The census tranche of data on housing for the District of North Vancouver is coming out in February. And so a significant chunk of the data that's inputted in here is based on 2016 numbers or BC Vital statistic updates since that time. And so it's hard to get an accurate snapshot when you're, in the last quarter before a new 5-year tranche of data is released. When we were looking at the official community plan originally, there were recommendations all over the place for how fast the District of North Vancouver should grow, how much they expected Metro Vancouver to grow, how much Canada was expected to grow. And in the end, I can't say that anybody got it nailed down, that in the data, as we collected data starting in 2008 for it, nobody could have predicted the significant changes we had in our community for transportation, housing costs in particular. And so it's very hard for these sort of long-term looking documents to be considered accurate, which is why I will applaud the provincial government for having all municipalities have this moment of introspection, looking at their need and reporting on it, but also to note that it's not necessarily a guiding document. It's a document that you have to come back to and consider when you're making decisions, and as a snapshot and what you expect the projected changes to be in your community. But it is not in and of itself of the same prominence as an official community plan or something where you cannot collide with it. So the municipality still has the ability to determine how dense it wants to be going forward. These kinds of recommendations talk to an overall macro change within the region potentially, but again, it's complex and difficult to be able to nail that down. So just one example, and if you were to chart the growth of Canada for about a 10-year period leading up to 2018, you would have seen it consistently between 1 and 1.2% of national growth from all sources, biological, immigration, whatever, all sources. And it was really, really stable. And then, you have a change in policy. The federal Liberal governments are elected. They decide to go from about 250,000 people through immigration a year up to over 400,000 people from immigration per year. And all of a sudden we go up to 1.4% national growth. And then you would get into COVID, and we're down to 0.4% and probably 0.6% for this year. So really a dramatic change where you had 10 years of stability in the projected growth for Canada and for our urban areas. And now you all of a sudden end up in a situation where you have some wild swings, and it's very difficult to project where we're going to be in 2030 with the dramatic changes that we've seen in the last couple of years. For me, my concern is that, you can grow the community at a faster rate. We had talked about, as we led into the OCP, about a 1% growth rate being something that was sort of acceptable to the community, also, recognize some of the regional needs. But that would be about 320 units per year, about population of about 800 people per year at about a 1% growth rate. But you still have to recognize what you want to achieve by growing. Do we grow because we feel we have, the deontology? Do we have the duty to Canada, we have the duty to our region to accommodate these people? Do we grow because it's a way to meet our corporate collective objectives? So we want to renew our infrastructure underground, add potentially new capacity for transportation, or other things that we decide that growth can be something that helps us do that? Or is it something we do for a more macroeconomic reason because we think that it's good for Western Canada to bring in more people in order to be able to support the quality of life that we've attained in the West in the area? I still think that it's retained by the municipality to decide the rate of growth that we're going to see, regardless of the projections or goals outlined by the region and by the provincial government. Land use decisions will still be the most key factor in determining the rate of growth, although it really is only a projection of the rate of unit growth, which reveals another problem we've had in the community, which is that while we've been building units, our ratio of people per household has been declining. Not a significant amount. It's gone from 2.9 down to about 2.7, although I think this next census data will see that further decline as we see the demographic changes we have in our community. And so you build new units, and then those new units get accommodated by a generation moving out from the old unit, or potentially a split of a family, marital breakdown of a family, causing them to take up more housing units in the community. And that happens. But it's accounts for between, it was 2.9 people per household and moving down to about 2.7 people per household. And so it's not always an accurate reflection. The number of units that you produce will not always reliably, predictably produce a population in your community. I think obviously it follows the general trend. If you're producing significantly more units, you're going to increase your population. But as we've seen out of some of the vital statistic numbers, even though the district had been producing units, our actual population growth was relatively flat. And so, and people had a perception that we were growing dramatically. But what was really happening was our housing, people per household was actually shifting. And so the new units were being consumed by smaller household sizes. So it's a fascinating exercise. I'm really glad that the province, again, asked municipalities to do that. In this process, I've also noted that we're one of the later communities in producing this. The great benefit was, while I was researching for today, I was able to look up the reports submitted to a ton of other communities, and quite a number of them took a very different approach. They went for about a 50-page total overall package, recognizing that the provincial government wanted them to identify these 50 specific statistics, and so it ended up being about that size. And then you have some municipalities like our neighbor Burnaby that was well over 200 pages for their package, so they decided to go into a much greater depth and detail into their housing interest. But what I couldn't get my thumb on, and I guess maybe if I am going to formulate this into a question of some kind rather than just my ramblings, is Burnaby as an example. Burnaby's population is about triple what the District of North Vancouver's population was. But when they crunch all of their numbers, they come up with a significantly different percentage of core housing need. And they believe that they only need 15,000 units out to 2030, which for a population of triple the size of ours would mean that they would be on a much lower growth track than the District of North Vancouver if you go by the Metro Vancouver numbers for Burnaby. It creates kind of some weird anomalies where you have a community that has like 6 SkyTrain stations and has all the infrastructure, and yet the process recommends that we put more people in areas that don't have that infrastructure. It causes me just this big headache. I mean, we should be looking at the region as a whole and saying, where is our major transportation infrastructure, and why is that not becoming the area where we're concentrating our growth, which was the original point of the regional growth strategy back in the day, was to create dispersed hub and spoke model development within the Lower Mainland, and but with the intent of improving transit resources, which we have done in places like Burnaby, Coquitlam, New Westminster, Vancouver, and yet those areas are not the areas targeted for additional development. It's the areas that don't have that core transportation infrastructure that is now being recommended for all of this additional density. So there's something wrong in the data, something wrong in the conclusion that it creates, that the areas that are less served by transit somehow need to take on more of the burden of density and development going forward. So once again, thank you to staff for their report. I have lots of interest from council here, so I'm going to go over to the councillors. Councillor Murray, your comments.
Thank you, Mayor Little, and thank you for your comments. I think that was, very well informed, and you bring up a lot of questions. I think one of the observations is that the information that we have is confusing, is not complete, unclear. We're using data that's 6 years old. And again, the timing is a very important point in regards to the census. I have put a call into our representative at the UBCM, actually, to find out why and what's going to happen to us if we don't post this in January. Who are they taking to jail? Do they take the mayor, or do they just take Dave? Because it's ridiculous that we are going to be posting something with data that is not even current. And so much has happened in 7 years, good heavens. So that's the one thing. The other thing is that our own data on our own inventories of housing in this community seem to be not even in existence. I think the Rental and Affordable Housing Task Force asked for that over and over and over again. And they were never successful at getting any of it. I think the letters that came in today just showed the frustration in regards to the report, to the information, to the clarity or the lack thereof of us making decisions when we don't really have the information we need to make those decisions. And it's getting more complicated, less clear, and harder to follow, even for those that spend all day. Mr. Teven, the Housing and Affordable Task Force, I think are very, very frustrated with this report and where we're going. The thought that we are going at 70 or 60% market and 30%, between 30 and 40% rental, I think. Is that right? Are those the right numbers? They seem to be changing depending on what I look at. But it seems to be the opposite of what the community has been saying that we actually need, you know, given the past, given how much market was brought on board so quickly. You know, even this idea that the 1 bedrooms and the studios, again, seem to be the majority of what is forecasted into the future to 2031. And those conversations were very clear in regards to the market being able to sell the 1 bedroom and studios easier than the 2 and 3 bedrooms, because there was so much investment coming into the region. And that's what was being flipped. Those were all the units that were being flipped and marketed offshore. So that's another huge concern. I'm not sure if we are, sorry, I'm not sure if we have already built 6,000 units. We need 4,500 more and then another 7,500. I'm still not sure what the total calculation to 2031 is. I'm not sure if they're targets or goals or ideas. I think, like you, Mayor Little, that it's up to the community to determine what we do. And I think, you know, certainly this council has been more interested in looking at purpose-built rental and more affordable housing than previous councils who, you know, we're looking at market housing as the solution and to the problem that I wasn't sure ever existed. I think the comment within the presentation in regards to why the bump up in rental took place in the last couple of years, I think it was stated that it was because the international student market had disappeared. And I think it was foreign workers. Was that right? Did I hear that right? Can someone clarify? It was in one of the presentation that Miss Daly, I hope I said that right, Miss Daly or Daly, I'm not sure, Daly, presented. So Miss Atla, could you just clarify that the bump up was international students?
Thank you so much. Through the mayor to Councillor Mira. Yes, Ariel Daly is the pronunciation for our planner. The change in the bump up in rental, yes, influenced by a number of factors. International students, one of them, or the availability thereof. Also other factors as well. I think that was a slide that our consultant was speaking to earlier as well. I'm not sure if Matt wants to add anything to that at this point.
Yeah, happy to add to that. It's actually a trend that we've seen region-wide, is this increase in the vacancy rate over the last year, linked to certainly to some extent to international students, also to changing, pretty significant and rapidly changing housing situations for many more vulnerable renters that may have had to find other housing, leaving existing rental more vacant than it was in years prior. It remains unclear whether that's going to be a long trend. Anecdotally, we've been hearing through the work that we've done that we anticipate seeing that the vacancy rate drop back down again in 2021. We'll have new data from CMHC on that. We'd anticipate in January that would cover this year's vacancy rate for the district and other communities in the region.
Thank you. Ms. Atva, I can barely hear you. I don't know if your volume's not up or something. It's hard to hear you. So I'm surprised, thanks for that information. I'm surprised that there's no mention of short-term rental. I've had international students for 10 years, and before that, 10 years before that, I had them for 5 years. And the large amount of international students actually live in existing homes. They don't live in suites. They live in existing single-family homes for the high school and even university international students. So I'm not sure why we think it's that, but I will tell you, short-term rentals, and I've said this many times, at the end of 2019, there was maybe 200 and 250 units on Craigslist for rental on the North Shore. By May of 2020, 1,600. It's still up by about 600. And you could furnish an entire house for $5,000 on Facebook Marketplace. And what I deduced from that is, there were no travelers, and there was a lot of short-term rentals, including, I think there's many units, and again, we don't have the data, so it's all theoretical, but the units where we didn't put any rental restrictions on a lot of the developments that we've approved over the years. Are they being rented out for short-term rentals? And that's a lot of the information that we need. We've been asking for on Airbnb years now. We had one brought forward a couple of years ago, and then it hasn't come back. I understand that it's coming back in the spring. I think that report suggested that short-term rent should be allowed in basement suites and carriage houses. And I think if we're talking about trying to increase housing, we should be making sure that that housing is reserved for full-time. Why would we take it up with short-term rentals when we have a crisis? But maybe this is the data that we need to be able to determine if we truly do need a crisis, or we just need to shift some of the uses. It begs the question. It's in our sectors. A lot of the uses that we thought were going to go into these areas with increased populations, it's not happening. They're car dependent. The services don't exist. And the idea of densifying in certain areas so people would get out of their cars and walk and have all of this is that so they don't need to drive to a destination grocery store or wherever they need to go, was meant to be within those densified town centers, and some of them are falling short on that. So I think we have a huge way to go. Does anybody know if this information, I guess we have to post it by January as per the UBCM requirements for the grant. And will we automatically update the information based on the census, and how long is that going to take? And meanwhile, it feels like everything takes quite a long time to get done, and or at least gathering of information. And I really feel like we are in the dark in regards to truly where we are. And yet we're being asked to make decisions about the future with very limited. Thank you, Mayor Little.
Thank you, Councillor Muri. I'm going to direct that question to Ms. Atva. The question was, what future updates can we anticipate as more up-to-date information and stats become available?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Little. I hope you can hear me fine. I think I'm as loud as I can get on this machine, but please let me know if the volume is not adequate. Yes, I agree with statements that were made around timing of data. And I know working with our housing task force, they also would have loved to have a lot of input into the housing needs report. Our projects have been working at different timeframes, not through design, but just by way of it happening that way. When the census data comes out, we absolutely will want to take a look at that. We're required by the province to update every 5 years. We do anticipate with the new data from the census primarily that we will want to take a look at that sooner. It'll be, you know, we all wish that the timing would have been different, and we had explored various mechanisms as well to try and get that alignment. However, I think we've taken the data sources that we're required to look at, and we look forward to updating that as more becomes available.
Thank you. Next speaker I have is Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Litt. I'm going to take my mask off so I can be heard properly. I guess I'd echo some of the comments made by yourself, Mayor Little, and Councillor Murray. And I wonder about the projections part of the report and the statement of need part of the report seem to be speaking two separate languages, and that's kind of how I feel this comes out. And if, you know, in my mind, if we were doing a housing needs report, if we were making projections, it would be based on the housing that we feel we need in the community, not taking a 20-year trend line going back to 20 years or 15 years and looking at what type of housing we already have and saying, well, if we continue along this path with the housing that we already have, this is the type of housing that will happen. So I'm not sure if that approach to making those projections is part of the package, if that's mandated by the requirements from the province or not. Maybe Ms. Atva can answer that question first. The projections part, where we say in the report, where the report says these are how many homes will be needed. These are the types of homes that will be needed. You know, tenure. Is that projection and the way that we produce those numbers mandated as part of the requirements from the province?
Ms. Atva?
Thank you very much to Councillor Bond through the mayor. I agree with the assessment of the data and the demographic projections and the statements of need. They are both requirements from the province for the housing needs report. The statements of needs are based on our conversations and discussions through the engagement process. So they do point to, and some of these are outlined in the council report and also in the full housing needs report regarding housing for seniors, housing for immigrants. They are statements of need. So there is a bit of I can see how one might say there seems to be a little bit disconnect. We're not getting the numbers with those statements of needs, but we're doing detailed demographic projections based on Stats Canada, regional information that actually do point us to numbers around total number of units broken down by building type, which means bedrooms and core housing needs. So yes, those are the requirements from the province at this time.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time with that, because I think in my mind, if we're going to put numbers as projections for the types of homes that are needed in the community, we would use all of this great demographic data that has been compiled. I think this is excellent. It's something I've been kind of doing off the side of my desk on my own, going through the census data back 20 or 30 years to look at these type of trends. But these projections are really measuring the impact of the land use and housing policies that we have had for 2 decades. They're measuring the impact of a low, no growth policy. They're measuring the impact of our existing housing stock, which is very unbalanced, heavily weighted towards ownership, heavily weighted towards the most expensive form of housing, single detached housing. And you see that in the changing in the demographics. We've just got 2 or 3 census periods, 2006 to 2016 in this report. But if you compare how our demographics are changing in the District of North Vancouver, let's take one of the measures in this report, the the average income of couples with children. You know, in 2011, in the District of North Vancouver, it was $135,000. In 2016, it was $200,000. A huge jump, $70,000 in 5 years for couples with children. Now, we need to start looking at those trends and then relating it back to see what households, what types of households are not being served by our existing housing stock. What types, what types of families, singles, couples, couples with kids, couples without kids, who's being excluded by our existing housing policies? Who's being excluded by the existing makeup of our community? You can see that just in the numbers as they're being presented. We are a very welcoming community for couples that make more than $200,000 a year and have a $750,000 down payment for a single detached home. Because I think everyone realizes that new residents in our community the majority of new residents aren't moving into town centers, they're moving into existing homes. And so we're a very welcoming community based on our existing housing stock to a very select group of people, high income people, high net worth people. And so if we're going to make projections and kind of follow our philosophy that we talk about in the OCP of being an inclusive, welcoming community, we need to use this data to say who is not being served, who is being excluded, and what types of homes, if we want to be inclusive, if we want to have homes for single parent families, if we want to have homes for maybe couples with kids that only make $150,000 a year and only have $100,000 for a down payment, or maybe $200,000. We need to use this data to look at who is being left out. And then from there, look at the housing types that we would need in order to give those people the opportunity to live in our community. And that's what I would see if we're going to make projections. We should be saying, well, these are the number of market rental homes of certain sizes that we need based on our desire to be welcoming, inclusive to households of this size with these types of incomes. These are the types of ownership apartments or townhomes that we need to be welcoming to these types of households with this type of income, with that type of demographic. And the same for social housing, for below market housing, for supportive housing. If I don't feel good about approving a projection or a report that says we need these many homes when that's just kind of straight lining what has happened in the past. I really think we need to dig into this demographic data that's been shown, understand what the changes are based on our existing policies, and then say, these will be numbers and these are the types of homes we need to be more inclusive to the people that are currently left out. I think that's where I'd want to go with the report.
I have responses from Mr. Milburn and from the consultant, Matt Thomas. Mr. Milburn, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Little, to Councillor Bond. I think you probably noted from our introductory statements that we really as staff do concur that we are being handcuffed somewhat by the structure and the mandate that the province has provided to us and how specifically what data we're to use and how we're to report it. So what I'm hearing, I think we would totally agree as staff, is that really this information needs to be supplemented by a conversation that council has already had and provided direction on around the action plan that would give guidance on not just these specific types of projections that the province has asked for, but what I would call a design approach, or to determine the kind of housing mix that we need to achieve the goals that council has set, to achieve the objectives that council has set for social and supportive housing and other forms of housing in the community to meet the full spectrum of need. So, I'd say we need to supplement this information as it's robust. And I know Matt Thompson has some additional comments about why the province might have chosen this approach in possibility because they're asking it of everyone. And so they picked a fairly standard simplified projection approach. And so we're meeting that requirement, but we know there's so much more that this conversation has shown that this could be really a housing needs report could be so much more. So, Your Worship, I'm not sure if Matt has some additional comments.
Yeah, I'll go to Matt Thompson, follow, and then return to the floor to Councillor Bond. Matt Thompson.
Thank you very much. Through the mayor to Councillor Bond, I think just to echo what Dan just said, the province has selected this because every community in BC needs to complete these. And so using a simplified projection method, we are fully aware, we've done many of these across BC now, and we're fully aware of the limitations of this approach, because it represents really a sort of business as usual status quo approach. It doesn't represent what's going to happen if we make policy changes at the local level, if there are policy changes through the provincial government and the federal government that actually impact these numbers. And I think perhaps in the report, we just need to do a better job of drawing attention to that. I will note that the legislation requires local governments to consider these reports when they're revising their OCPs. It doesn't necessarily mean that these, again, the projections are not targets. And in fact, I think, you know, an OCP review could be quite explicit about saying, in fact, we want to move away from the trend line that we're seeing in the housing needs report because of the needs that are identified within that report. And just to cover briefly, you know, some of what that is, when we were speaking through engagement, the desire, the need to see more rental housing and more affordable types of housing right across the continuum, more options for renters, more supportive housing, more supports for immigrant families and Indigenous households, were all things that were raised throughout our engagement with the community. And of course, that's covered in much greater detail in the report. But those are the types of units or types of housing that I think really start to come out through the key statements of need about what is actually needed as opposed to what is projected. Because because the projections are they're limited. They have a lot of methodological limitations, and I think we would be the first to sort of recognize that and say that I think what they're useful for is to say for communities to make their decisions. I think as you and other councillors are noting about what the direction, trends, and policies are, and given the recent work that the district has done through its OCP action plan, for example, I would say that action plan helps to put the district on track to making those changes so that it's not just a static trend line in one direction based on historical trends, but actually represents some meaningful departure from that pattern that we've seen based on the history of the district. So.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bond.
Yeah, I think maybe one more comment on the growth narrative here in the district. And one thing that pulling out the data, income is just one example, but the drastic change in median income and the drastic increase specifically of households in the district that are now making $200,000, $300,000 a year is directly linked to our existing housing stock. And so as part of the growth narrative here, if you do the same comparison on median income change in communities that have been adding significant amounts of new multifamily housing, you'll find that the income change is more moderated. And that's because people that have less wealth and lower income are able to purchase or rent multifamily housing easier than they are single detached housing. So one thing that the data is telling me from this report is that if we continue with a low or no growth policy here in the district, the trend of the district becoming more and more wealthy and being only open to people of higher and higher incomes will continue. And I think that's one reason why we might want to pursue faster growth is to add more housing options so that more people of different income levels can afford to live here. Because if we continue doing the same thing and growing slowly and having a small proportion of multifamily housing, a small proportion of rental housing, then we will become a more and more exclusive community. So I think that's kind of one conversation that needs to be had when we talk about the growth narrative, is a more balanced housing stock. allows more people and more different types of households to live and have an opportunity to live in the community. So yeah, I'm not sure how we line up this projections versus the needs, but the data, the background data in here is excellent. And I think that as soon as the new census data comes out, if staff can just add another column for the next year, that would be excellent, and bring something back to council as soon as possible. This is excellent information.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Next up, I have Councillor Hanson.
Can't hear you at all.
You're muted.
No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hanson, you need to have your desk one on green. There you go. And your iPad off for sound off. Good, go for it. Nice and loud.
How about that? Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Thank you so much. And so just to say, I'd like to thank everybody that was involved in preparing all of this material in this report, and also the speakers that came before me. I've found the discussion very interesting. As I read the report and all the detail that is in it, the very comprehensive statistical analysis and facts and figures of every description, I was, of course, struck by the fact that, and it's been stated around the table today, that what we have here is a whole bunch of facts and figures and historical projections, but what we don't have is a plan for our community. The plan for our community has to come from this council and has to come according to our needs and values. And I'm not sure that this is the place right now for us to be debating how much growth we want to have and the degree to which the growth can be matched by infrastructure that is required to maintain our way of life, or the degree to which we should be prioritizing different income groups and those that are most in need, although a lot of that is portrayed in the report. And I must say, on first reading of the report, I did find it incongruous that there was so much identification of the need to provide housing for seniors and renters and single parent families and Indigenous led families, persons with disabilities, and yet in the end there was this bold statement that 2/3 of the additional homes had to be owner households. And of course, to say that is a misunderstanding. Perhaps what I just said is a misunderstanding of the report, because this report actually isn't prescriptive. It doesn't tell us the type of housing that we're going to create through our initiatives and through our zoning. What this report does is provide a structure through which that analysis can be conducted by looking historically and by looking into the future. So I'm going to leave it at that. I do think the report could do, perhaps, if I were to give some comment, it would be, I think it could more clearly state its purpose, which is to fulfill the requirements of this reporting that's being set out by the provincial government. It's an analytical tool, not a prescriptive tool as to the nature of the community that we want to create. And I also think, from my point of view, the report could perhaps delve a little more deeply into the population assumptions. And I know there was discussion of a new census coming out, but there's this underlying assumption that we're going to have an extra 1,000 residents a year and an extra 15,000 residents over the next to 2031, and then 7,056 households. But I'm still a little confused how those numbers are derived at, unless it's simply projecting forward and using other data. But why those numbers for our community I think perhaps there could be more clarity around the fact that those numbers, how those numbers are arrived at, and frankly, how arbitrary those numbers are in the context of our community, our growth pattern, past and future, and our desires for growth, which will be ultimately a matter of governance, and that this council will reflect the values of our community in determining that growth. So thank you very much for all the information. I found it fascinating. There's enough facts and figures here to keep one busy for a long time in better understanding our community, and I found that very useful. And perhaps that's the purpose of this report, is to make sure that we do turn our minds to the kinds of information that is useful to us as we develop these broader questions about the shape of the future of our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Councillor Kern.
Thank you to everyone who worked on this, and particularly all the folks who participated in the outreach that staff did to talk to get some real world stories. So I'm going to start with some questions that I'm hoping staff or the consultants might be able to answer, and then I'll get into some comments. I share everyone's concern around these numbers not being meaningful and perhaps not actually doing anything to advance the objectives of a just and equitable society, the way they're laid out. And I did wonder if we would be able to, if council supports sending a letter to the province to express our concerns with the way that this projection numbers are being used and could potentially be used to reinforce existing systems that we don't actually agree with. So I'm not sure if the consultant can speak, if you've worked with other municipalities, like, are we unique in that concern, or have other municipalities expressed that? If you don't know, that's okay. But I do think when things like this come up and a policy is prescribed, it's very helpful probably for them to hear of how it's actually being received in a real world scenario on this level, and perhaps some changes could be made. So I wonder if there's any comment on that to start.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, I mean, certainly projections are a much discussed component of any housing needs report in the majority of the communities that we work within, for many of the same reasons that council is touching on tonight. That it represents rather a sort of a business as usual model rather than a change-oriented model. I think it's worth noting that critiques have been leveled at this projection approach by the expert panel on housing affordability in BC. So there are other voices that are sort of taking this approach, but they do also call for a more prescriptive approach to projections, which is worth being cautious about potentially. So I think certainly, again, to echo, I think what's been said a couple of times, they aren't prescriptive, and perhaps one of the ways that the province could support more of this work is to note that part of the key statements of need should be highlighting the difference between kind of a historical trend line versus apparent need in the community that we see through data like core housing need and other key points that have been touched on.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I just wanted to confirm that these were, I did read this in the report, but these were based on 2050 Metro, because there had been some talk about them, but it is 2050 Metro projections.
2050 Metro population projections, and then Urban Matters worked with city staff. I mean, we have a model that we use. It's based on census data and historical census data and the changes in household tenure, household type, and age groups within households, and how those patterns have changed out over time. So.
And since you've got your finger on the pulse here, has there been any discussion around how, when something very significant, such as the 2022 data comes forward, how, because it's every 5 years and it's just the timing is very, it's just off by, this report's due in January, that new data starts to roll out in February, how the province would, because I know that it's not prescriptive and et cetera, we can incorporate that new data, but is there any plans for how the province would update that, or only every 5 years?
No, so the province, I mean, the housing data will actually be released by September of next year. So that's when the census is planning to release the housing profile for communities. We would anticipate that probably the province would be looking at putting together their custom package. So they actually do a request on behalf of the municipalities in order to get data that's not typically available through the publicly available census profile that provides more detail on, for example, income by tenure group and core housing need by tenure group, public. So, you know, we would anticipate that the province would be making that request by 2023. We have actually been speaking with them and talking to them about, you know, which components of that data are more useful than others and which ones can probably be left behind. So we're hoping that we'll see a streamlined custom data package in 2023. And certainly I think, you know, a lot of communities have expressed the same frustration around the age of the data. And we would recommend updating, you know, as quickly as you can, although recognizing it will be probably at least another year before we start seeing the really important data that we need to see out of the census. But the one benefit of having this older data be what's reported on in this first round of reports is it provides a pretty solid and robust baseline. And we know what's happened in the last 5 years. So it'll be kind of affirming and telling to see what comes out of the 2021 data as to whether our communities are on track. So it's also worth noting that because the reporting requirements are actually fairly flexible, it's possible to go with a streamlined sort of update to the report. It doesn't need to be the big comprehensive document that this baseline report represents. It could be something more in the realm of a 15 to 20 page update that reports on key indicators and looks at the changes in growth and what was coming out of the first round of reports.
Okay.
Mr. Milburn, sorry, Councillor, Mr. Milburn has a response as well.
Thank you, Your Worship, to Councillor Kieran. Yeah, as Matt mentions, the full statistical package comes out later, but some of the early data will come out earlier in the year in 2022. Our recommendation as staff would be that exactly that, as Matt said, that as soon as the data is available next year, that if we can extract at least some key indicators, maybe not the full data set, but some key indicators, that we try to report that to council as early as possible next year, possibly at the same time that we report on the pace of development information, which we typically report between May and July. So that would be our goal, again, subject to whatever we can get from the census at that time.
I'll give you a sneak peek of what I'm looking for. No, but one thing that I'm really interested in is because purpose-built rental has not been built for a long time, but is starting to be built, it will be interesting to see what percentage of renters are still in core housing need, given the new units coming online. Because I suspect, and what I'm hearing is that a lot of renters with low to moderate incomes in particular, and we know, I'm not telling anyone anything we don't know, are still struggling in a market rental scenario. There was a point on page 5 that said 85% of new households in 2006 to 2016 were renters. So 85%, can someone speak to, is that, so 1,170 of 1,370 new households over that decade were renters?
That's correct. And the reason that's not reflected in, or it's rather is not fully reflected in the projections, is because the projections again take a historical view of kind of a more of a like 20 to 30 year period, where again the bulk of the growth in that period of time was mostly owners, about 75 to 80% owners, about 20 to 25% renters. So it's more kind of the flattening effect that you get when you average out over a longer period. But I think it's worth noting that that trend is really important over the 10 years because it may be indicative of the future too, and a shift or a sort of inflection point that happens where now we may see renters be one of the drivers of growth in many communities.
Okay. And just something on language. We've talked about this internally and with staff about equity seeking versus equity deserving, like different ways to, I don't think the onus should be on people to seek equity. I think it should be on us to create equity. And that aligns with our Coalition of Inclusive Municipalities Goal 7, which is specifically surrounding housing. So I think that that's important. And I guess I just, in closing on sort of the human element, I thought that I was really moved by the report because it echoes a lot of what I hear in the community. And people are struggling, and more people are struggling, and more people are falling behind. And to have, you know, half of folks looking for subsidized housing be seniors in our society is abhorrent. And so I think that those the highlights in the report, which have been backed up by data, but more importantly by stories in our community, I think are really motivating and humbling and drivers for you know, the transformation that I do think is required, because we seem to, as a society, be more comfortable now talking about equity and less comfortable talking about inequity. And so I think we need to focus on what ways are we exacerbating existing systems that are already inequitable. And so I think there's so much work for us to do. But I'm glad to have some of this to support that work as we move ahead. And I mean, the data is 139% increase in home ownership, unearned wealth, you know, it's really, really hard, and we need system change. I mean, that's why I think this misses the mark from a policy perspective, if it is just looking at the existing systems, because what we're hearing from anyone who works in this, that the market is not going to deliver for people who are working low and moderate income jobs, in particular, people with disabilities, racialized folks, people are just being left out. And I want to live in a community where they're not. So we have a lot of work to do, but I think this is an important step. I don't know if we can, I think we all share the same concern about the projection model, but I guess it's still going to go ahead from what it sounds like.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Curran. Next up is Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd just like to make a couple of comments. First, thank you to staff and everybody who was involved producing this. It's a lot of work to put this together. And then it's a lot of work for those of us who don't put it together to figure it out. I wish that it had come out sooner. I wish that there was more time that we had. I wish that we could involve the public better, because right now the only way the public knows about this is if they happen to look on our website and our agenda. And I think too many people in too many years have been studied on this subject to just have a one-night meeting, not particularly well advertised. But I do thank all the work that's gone into it. One of my comments, though, just on the structure of how this came about, without getting into the details here, is the timing of this, the collection of data and preliminary analysis. I'm not sure what that refers to. I'm assuming that means looking at the 2016 and the past censuses. I'm looking at page 173 of the presentation tonight. The June to September timeline, community and stakeholder engagements. Well, I have a problem with the stakeholders that were consulted. They consulted 5 actual real case people who are dealing with struggles to do with housing. That represents 8% of the 45 people they talked to. And the biggest group they talked to were the corporations and the companies and the employers and the developers and the builders and the contractors. So to me, this is about needs for the real people. And to only have 5 input from 5 people who are struggling with housing, I think is lacking. I'm also concerned about no, I've already said that, sorry. Moving along, when we get to page I'm also concerned about the timeline that everybody's talking about, that it goes back to 2016, and we're not really, a lot has changed very quickly in the housing market. On 175, we talk about rental market, and I'm just wondering, are those statistics in there specific to the DNV, or is that a general vacancy rate? Because I recall a district in 2017, I think, or 2018, we had a negative rental market. And that's not reflected in this data point here. So is this specifically applied to the DNV? Could somebody answer that, or is it an average?
Thank you.
Hello?
Ms. Atba?
Thank you very much. I hope the sound is still good. There were a number of questions in there, but just to come to this latest one on page 175 in the vacancy rate, this is based on DNV that the CMHC does every year in the fall. They do their survey of rental markets and then produce that report.
Excuse me.
Yes. Councillor Forbes, yes.
No, I don't. Somebody's breathing very hard and I can't hear Tina.
Okay.
Could you repeat what you said, Tina?
We'll make sure everything else is muted, and then we'll return to Ms. Atba. Ms. Atba, go ahead.
Thank you very much to Councillor Forbes through the mayor. You had a number of questions, but the last one there regarding the vacancy rate, yes, that is District of North Van data based on CMHC's last report, which came out in January. They do their survey right now, October, November of every year, but that is DNV data.
Oh, okay. Just wondering on page 176, when we talk about average sale prices, if it might not be wiser to talk about cost maybe per square foot. We might get a better idea, a better handle on that instead of all the other factors that can build into sales prices. Because you could have one or two, like we all know, one or two exceptional sale price, which is going to skew something for that year. So I just an idea that maybe, you know, the average cost per square foot might be helpful. The other, another thing that I'm concerned about is I'm trying to reconcile, like I'm going back to 2017 when I was on the implementation committee to see how well the OCP was actually being implemented. And a lot of what that committee said came through again with the task force report. And I'm trying to reconcile the implementation committee report, the task force report, and a couple of our recent reports to the idea that we need 78% ownership units. Most of the people on this council now ran in the election running on what we needed, and what we needed was rental and to maintain our purpose-built rental. And I can't, I mean, the task force report that we just got in September just screams rental. Implementation committee said we'd done a lousy job of rental. We didn't have enough. So I can't reconcile between those reports and the task force, which was a 2-year study, and those are really current. I can't reconcile that with needing 78% ownership and only 22% rental. That's just insane. I go by the task force report, and rental is what we need. Rental is a stepping stone into ownership. Maybe some people don't remember that, but most people get into buying because they get into rental first, they save, they move up in their careers, they get money, and then they step into ownership. That's just sort of the normal way of life. You can't automatically just step into housing unless you buy a really rundown house and fix it up and sell it. So anyway, I have a real concern about how we reconcile our latest reports from the task force, and also the OCP action plan too, also that just was in July of this year, and it's rental, rental, rental. So I don't understand that percentage on ownership. Perhaps somebody could explain that to me later. Also, there's another thing that's not factored in here at all, and I brought this up before. How that investigative reporter, Sam Cooper, has done, and also with the study that's being done right now, how much effect that outside investment and basically very wealthy people came in here and bought in here and didn't necessarily live here. So that affected the number of rentals in a sense that when the market started, they didn't rent them out. And then when the market started to go down, they did turn them into rentals to try and recoup some money. But it's not just, you know, the thing that's pushing up North Vancouver prices is not just when we talk about couples with $200,000 salaries. Those are not people who work here generally. You may find a few like that, but most of those are people who have immigrated to this country with very high skills, and they choose to live in the district. And all you need is a few families like that, and you can go around the district and see some of the new single family homes that are maxing out lots for 2 people or 3 people. That can skew our stats quite badly too. So I don't assume that just because, you know, the wage for a 2-person family is now around 200,000. I don't assume that that's the norm. I think you got to look at immigration as well and see if those are jobs that are actually functioning here. I also don't agree with something that was said earlier about we need to say, okay, this is what we need to build for this amount, because that's exclusionary. If you start putting a certain framework on who we're only building for certain people with a certain wage or a certain income, then I think that's an exclusionary policy. I also find the stats a bit confusing in what is included and what isn't included. For instance, are the Tsleil-Waututh, the Squamish, and the, what they're building right now, are their units included in this report, or are they not? Maybe I could ask that question now.
I think, Ms. Adpa, can you respond to that?
Thank you very much to Councillor Forbes. The data does not include housing development on the reserves that are our neighbors.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe we should be. I know that some of the housing is going to be restricted to their own members, but some of it may become, they may be building on that land for anyone to come and move into. So I think we should look at the question of whether that should be included in our units. I also am having trouble reconciling, because we're going forward from some things like the rental and affordable housing strategy, which came up in 2015 and was passed in 2016 under another council. And some of the other things, I'm concerned that some of the way that perhaps we've misled staff in a way that some of this council's concerns and things they wanted to deal with in their term aren't being reflected. We seem to be still, I mean, it's being reflected, but the strong message you're getting is still the message from before this council. This council, when it came on board, the majority of it anyway, ran on slowing down, not stopping. everybody wants to say stop, but slowing down development, finding out what our actual needs were, and trying to build those gaps that are happening. And those gaps were kind of laid out to be supportive housing, social housing, low to middle income rental. That's what we were concerned about, because there'd been lots of expensive market ownership that had been built in the previous term or approved in the previous term. And so we all were trying to focus on those different areas. But sometimes when I read these kind of reports, it just seems to me that I don't know if we've misled staff or if we need to go back and sort of clarify what this council, majority of this council wanted to focus on, because it was more.
So, Councillor, we're up over 15 minutes in your comments now.
Can I come back
if we have time. So where we're at right now, though, just to be clear, I don't think that the staff didn't make a projection based on council's wishes or council views or council's key priorities. They were making the projection based on certain key factors that really were meant to mimic what other municipalities were doing, as far as the input data. It's data that was available from census figures, available from BC Vital Statistics numbers. It wasn't, the projection is not taking into account philosophy or ideology. It is more or less trying to represent anticipated need and growth that had been identified by other bodies historically. So I hear your concern that you don't think the numbers reflect the priorities of the council. I don't think they've claimed to reflect the priorities of the council.
Can I just say that be careful what you put in this report, because as everybody knows, that report last year in June, opening doors, there was a suggestion made that the government hold municipalities to whatever they put in their housing needs report. So I think it's extremely important to be aware of that.
And I think that's fair. And I think it's been pointed out a couple of times tonight that I don't think any of us would want that. For a variety of different reasons, this projection that's in here strikes probably about half of our council interested in a lower growth and about half of our council interested in a more aggressive stance on it. So I don't think that we can specifically point to what's going to be received out of the draft report. Councillor Back, your comments as a first-time speaker.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much to staff and to our consultants for all of the work that went into this report. It is a lot of data and a lot of great information that has come out of other reports and the census data. I just think it's great to have all of this information in this format. I share some of the views of people around the table. I think that it will be nice to have an update to this once the new census data comes out. I'm getting a lot of feedback. I don't know if somebody has a mic on, but if they could just put it on mute. So there's lots of different directions that we could go in this with this, and I don't think that tonight is necessarily the forum to debate, whether or not our community is really inclusive or whether this aligns with our OCP or other vision kind of documents. I think that the data and the format that we are mandated to follow is good. It's solid. But there were some things that jumped out at me. Councillor Curran mentioned around non-market housing and seniors, and the fact that it's close to half of the individuals who are on non-market waiting lists for non-market housing are seniors, and it makes me think, and I've thought about this a lot, is that this is a demographic that is the fastest growing demographic in our community, and I think we need to look at and housing and care for seniors in a more holistic kind of way. When we see that we have a population that's aging, we have declining household sizes. It's obvious that we're going to need to look for greater flexibility and housing options for older adults in our community. So lots of great comments, I thought, in the some of the feedback from the focus groups, and I want to thank everybody that was involved in that. I sit as the district council rep on the Chamber of Commerce, and so the section on workforce housing resonated with me and really highlighted just how the reality of not providing the kind of housing that people that work in this community need if they want to work and live here. Recently had a discussion with some of the chamber board about this very topic, and it is a real issue right now, and it's only kind of exacerbated by the pandemic, and that there's been lots of people that have been working remotely, of course, but as they start to return to work and haven't been having to make that commute over the last several months, it's going to be even more of a challenge to get some of these people back onto the North Shore. But just thought there were some really interesting thoughts that each of those focus groups in the different areas provided. I thought there was a real one of the things that jumped out was the fact that we need to work collaboratively across the North Shore, and we need to work with Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh. And that was even one of the comments, is that the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh, who were part of the focus group, would appreciate the opportunity to have more kind of proactive conversations with us around housing. So yeah, lots of good information, but again, that's my only comment at this point, but thank you very much for all of the work.
Thank you, Councillor Back. Second time speaker, Councillor Murray. Thanks,
Mayor Little. I mean, not so much the Squamish because their housing exists in the city, but is the Tsleil-Waututh going to be required to do the same needs assessment or the same report that we've just done? Ms. Atva, can you speak to whether this provincial requirement extends to First Nations?
Thank you very much, Mayor Little. To Councillor Murray, the requirements by the province apply to Treaty First Nations. They do not apply to other First Nations. However, there is an encouragement and an interest, as I understand, from many to look at this as a model for shaping their understanding of their housing needs. So that would be a yes for Tsleil-Waututh?
No, Tsleil-Waututh are not a Treaty First Nation.
But they've been in treaty discussions. Squamish wasn't in treaty discussions, but Tsleil-Waututh was. So
I don't believe either of those tables have been active for multiple years. When it said Treaty First Nations, that would be referring to like the Tsawwassen First Nations as an example locally.
Well, that seems a shame because certainly Tsleil-Waututh has garnered, a significant amount of housing in the district. And somehow that data needs to be included in this discussion, and the future of the addition to reserve on Dollarton and the potential of what might occur on those lands. That discussion obviously needs to happen, but certainly, how can we not include First Nations that are actively developing faster than we are? So that would be one thing. I guess the other thing that hasn't come up in this conversation is just the sheer price of land. And there's your problem, folks. It's land prices. Consider yourself all very lucky that you are homeowners. I'm not a homeowner at the moment, and I will tell you, it is frightening and a struggle. And I have a reasonably good job, although not ever certain. So that is a concern to be able to stay in this community long term. The properties that I can afford need tens of thousands of dollars of renovation. And most of the units that I can even consider are older stratas that need significant amounts of money in special assessments. And so when Councillor Bond talks about those people that we're trying to, figure out how to address, I think I'm in that group. I don't have $300,000 at my disposal, to be able to qualify for a mortgage. I'm one of the lucky ones. I've got a down payment, but it's still like, it's shocking what you can't get when you think you've got a reasonably good down payment. None of this is one size fits all. All families are different. All families are dealing with different struggles. All people are in different places in their lives. And we seem to think that if we just build more, we're going to be able to accommodate all those people. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how many of the people that rented at Emery. Can you just let the dog out, Sydney? Thank you. It's going to be really interesting to see how many people that had left Emery because of the Mosaic development, how many of them will actually go back into that development. And I expect very few. Just like the neighborhoods in Sealand that said, we love this neighborhood. We want to retire in this neighborhood, but this development is coming. So we'll go, but we're going to come back. I don't think any of them came back. It's for us to think that, on a project like Emery, which is what are we in now? Year 5, year 6? And then how long is it going to take to finish? Year 10, 11? That somehow people are going to put their lives on hold so they can come back. That's just naive. And I think, the development community, and I think we know that they're not. And the chances of them being able to afford, they left big units with lots of storage. That's the other thing that's not out there. Like even these 1 bedrooms and dens. Oh my God. They're like, I have got 3 children in high school, 3 animals. And that's another problem. I have 3 animals. The limit is like 1 or 2. So if I want to try to get one of these stratas, I got to deal with an animal. Anybody, any of you interested in it? I've got a cat and 2 dogs, and I can only take 2 animals into these stratas. A lot of these older stratas too, they don't allow rentals, or they allow 10% rentals. I think Councillor Bond lives in one where there's a cap rental, or it's grandfathered. Very challenging, all these rules. And then all the new developments that we're building or we're approving, rentals, go for it. Rent all of them. All of them can be rented. There's no restrictions. But the older ones that are larger, that have storage, you can't, there's no rental opportunity in the future. So there's a whole bunch of problems that we have, and the land value and the assessment and how land is assessed is the biggest one, because I'll bet everything that 10, 15 years, no matter how much we built, the prices are never going to go down, because it's all about location, location, location. And I don't think we understand that part of it. You can build 10, 20, 30 more towers, and the prices are not going to go down. And the people that live here right now, they are going to be moving laterally, because when those single family lots, like on Marie Place, when they get rezoned, they are going for the maximum amount, and they can never replace or buy back into this community. So I don't know if the path that we're heading down is correct, and certainly not in increasing. I think we got to find that balance, and the district's famous for this pendulum swinging one way or the other. 2 terms ago, we swung market, market, market. Now this council has brought us back to more social housing and purpose-built rental. Somehow we got to find a balance, and we got to catch up. Our infrastructure needs to catch up. And I know with the data that we've got within engineering, that interchange at the bottom of the cut is going to fail in 5 years. The density in the 2 other municipalities, plus First Nations, plus the Sea to Sky corridor, we don't take that into consideration. And I think we have to stop planning in silos and look at the entire North Shore and the sea to sky corridor, plus the fact that we have major access to the island. And if you want to see what happens with prices, just go there, because they used to be the affordable place to go and no longer.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor. Okay, now I would really love an opportunity for members of the public to be able to comment. Council, we've had a really good go at this on nearly 2 hours of discussion, only hearing from the council. Councillor Forbes, I see you've got your hand up. Do you have any closing remarks?
Quick. Just
okay.
A couple things, just quick. I just like Councillor Murray just alluded to here, we need to be planning for the North Shore, not individually, because you look at, if that's to be believed, that city of North Vancouver growth of 17%, and they are growing, they are developing. There's something being built almost every single week. When I get a newspaper, there's 2 or 3 applications in. So they have an impact. Whatever they do within their municipality and how fast they grow and what they're building, they have a huge impact on us as well. And so that's something else that needs to be considered, just if they're growing that fast. And the only other question I had, if anybody can answer it, is when somebody's on a wait list for non-market and market rental housing needs, how long are those average wait lists? Can anybody answer that?
It depends. I don't think there's a clear answer, but it can take anywhere from months to sometimes years, depending on the type of housing and type of unit that you need.
Is it usually large families that have the hardest time?
Family housing can be challenging because there's a lack of it, absolutely. But I would say that also for seniors housing, because the wait list is so long, the district is not alone in having a high proportion of seniors on the wait list. And so, the limited number of affordable units for seniors definitely impacts their wait list as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Curran, your comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to or talk about something that I have heard before, and I just want to name it and be cautious of when we talk about, I more than anyone am against the commoditization of housing, but I think we need to be careful around othering like people who are immigrating and their impact on that market. So I just wanted to flag that as a concern, that when we're talking about the commoditization of housing, that's a global problem, but that we're not othering anyone that lives in our community or any community for that matter.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, with one exception, though, that when you're talking at the macro level, I mean, obviously, when we have a national policy that moves from 250,000 in immigration in a year up to 400,000 people in immigration a year, it's going to cause some stress on some of these basic services. Maybe completely reasonable to do so, maybe in the best interest of the economy to do so, but it does play a factor in housing need in our communities, particularly when it's up at about 400,000 people. So it's, yes, you're right. It shouldn't be focused on identifiable groups. It shouldn't be focused on xenophobia of any kind. But I do think that it's one of the 2 major sources of growth, which is the declining source of growth, which is natural growth, and the increasing source of growth, which is by policy immigration in this country, which is obviously what people have voted for, because the government that increased it has been supported again. But so there's a fair way to address it in the comments without having the xenophobic overarching issue, which I think you're fairly addressing, Councillor Curran. Councillor Bond.
Maybe just to follow up on that as well, Mayor, and there's that narrative in Metro Vancouver about foreign capital, foreign ownership. But if you look in this report, specifically in the other reports that have been done, the non-resident housing reports that the province has done, the District of North Vancouver has one of the lower, if not lowest, percentages of foreign, of immigrants coming to our community as new residents. You see it in this report, much lower than the Metro Vancouver average, much lower than than other municipalities' average of immigrant new residents here. Most of the new residents or the people that move in the district, half of them already live in the district. Another quarter live in the region already. Another 15% are from within Canada, and then there's a very small portion, regionally comparative, that are immigrants that are moving into our community. And so, taking the regional narrative, whether it's a Vancouver narrative or a Toronto narrative about foreign ownership, foreign capital, and speculation, and applying it here, it doesn't play out here in the same way that it does in other communities. You look at the non-resident data. I remember the last time I analyzed it was maybe a year and a half ago, and of the 70 to 100 new multifamily homes that have been constructed over that period in the district, I think it was one was owned by a non-resident. The vast majority of homes, the most popular category for non-resident ownership in the district is single-family homes built prior to 1960, because that's the most popular numerous type of housing in the district. But our numbers are quite low and definitely don't follow the popular narrative that's in the region.
Okay. Thank you very much. Looking to members of the public to contribute. I have in person here, Mr. Teven, come on up. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address the workshop.
Thank you, Your Worship and Council. Can the remote members of Council hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Because I could remove my mask if it helps. Thank you, Your Worship. All of you, I'm sure, will be aware that I sent in a series of emails before talking about the numbers in the housing continuum. I don't want to waste too much time here talking about that because I think I've got it, a concept of where that all fits in. I see a report like this being very useful in the long term over time. Not necessarily this version of the report, but as a citizen, I want to see an assessment like this happen after each census that helps us look towards the future. And, when I talk about the importance of the housing continuum, what I want to see is a housing needs assessment that drives the right-hand column of that housing continuum. There's a number of things in this report that don't make any sense to me. First, the mix. Early in the report, that 78% of new build should be market ownership and 22% rental. Considering that the report later says 85% of our growth has come from rentals that we all know we haven't built, makes no sense. Makes no sense to me. I know that staff have declared that the housing on reserved lands, certainly the Tsleil-Waututh have built significant housing. I know that the Squamish have aspirations to build housing in between Highway 1 and Seymour River. There are parts of this report that talk about Indigenous peoples and population counts and forecasts. So it makes no sense that the housing built on reserved lands for non-Indigenous people don't get included in our housing needs. Because of course it's non-Indigenous people that go and live there and pay rent. That doesn't make any sense. I'm hoping it does in the future. The stakeholders, to me, don't make any sense. Seems to me this is a report built on consulting with the building industry. We didn't say this is what people looking to live here needs. They say this is what we want to build. And that's what this report seems to be more. I was surprised and I did really enjoy reading the experience spotlights that talked about the people. Most of them needed social or supported housing. The ones that I want to know about that aren't included, tell me about some of the displaced families from Seymour Estates and Emery Village, where they live now, how far they commute to stay in the same schools, keep the same jobs, and what is their path back to living in Lynn Valley, if they'll even have a municipality that betrayed them anymore. I want to know about those people. I've got 3 more points. Shall I continue?
Were they all sent in the email today?
No, no, these are all new based on the workshop.
Carry on.
The stakeholders, we didn't seem to have a lot about seniors housing, certainly seniors housing providers and advocates. You've heard me in the past express concern that CHAC commented on individual developments, but I certainly think it's appropriate that they would be one of the stakeholders consulted in an overall housing needs assessment. They were not contacted. I checked that with them. Chamber of Commerce, I'd like to see an employer survey. How many employees do you have? What percentage live in the district? And what percentage want to live in the district? As a former employer here, I can tell you that was a dire situation. Further to what Councillor Forbes said, there's also a provincial conversation going on, and this is the dire nature and risk of this report. There's a provincial conversation going on that the provincial government ought to ignore and override local community plans and implement growth strategies themselves, in spite of what councils say. I think there's a real danger, and that's where I see this report can be harmful to our community. The other thing I want to add to what Councillor Murray said about location driving property values. The other thing that drives property values is FSR and density. You want to hold property values down, then reduce speculation by reducing the, not the zoning, but the designation in the OCP. Lower those and you will reduce speculation and help affordability. The other thing is social housing. I really enjoyed reading that. This is my last comment. I really enjoyed reading that. I enjoyed the methodology. The one thing I would caution is this. If we go out to the social housing providers and we say, well, there's 700, I think the number is like 756, 748, somewhere in there. And we said, how many people are on your wait list? Well, that's a great thing to know. But if there's 748, and let's round it and say 750 people on the wait list, and the wait list is what would it be? 3 years long? Well, that's 250 people a year. And if we're looking forward to 2031, we actually need, 11 or 12 times 250 in that housing needs. We don't want to plan to clear a wait list that's 3 years old by 10 years from now. We want to plan to meet it so there's no wait list in 12, 10 or 11 years. So that's my feedback on what I've heard so far. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just comment, I think you're absolutely right. The sources have different definitions for different things, rental among them. When a new unit gets created that is a market strata unit, under some measures, it gets counted as a market strata unit, and under the others, because it hit the market as a rental unit, even though it's not purpose-built rental, but it is a secondary market rental, then that one under a different report gets counted as a secondary, as a rental unit. And so I think that's where you're getting the exaggerated 85% number from, is that a significant portion of the units that have been created in the last while have gone on the secondary market as rentals. And so they may not be purpose-built.
I think we much prefer a sophisticated primary market landlord than a secondary one.
Obviously the preference, and that's what we only give up CACs for the latter because of the permanence of it. So good point. Mr. Colbert, I moved you over from attendee to panelist because you had your hand up. I see your hand down. Did you have a comment?
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so my hand is actually still up, and I removed the mute. I agree with everything that Mr. Cheevan has said, and I want to make this clear to council. Last week I did some analysis of this presentation, and Mr. Cheevan and I did not speak until this morning. And ironically, much of the same information that he and I both questioned, we found to question it independently. Your Mayor and Your Worship and Council, my great concern here is that over the last 3 years, this council, and including during the 2018 municipal election, committed to moving away from one bedroom, market priced, owned housing. And yet 75% of the units in the pipeline are 1-bedroom market housing. That is inconsistent with what the council, this council, and that includes councillors Forbes, Curran, your worship, Mayor Little, and councillors Hanson and Muri, 5 of you, ran on last year. Now, I also want to say something else. I've been at this this challenge of dealing with non-market housing for a lot longer than any of you. It is very strange to me. It is, in fact, incomprehensible that after 3 years of council direction to staff, 3 years, we come back and we see a document in which council is being asked to accept in draft form a document that says 78% of housing will be market housing. It's inconsistent with everything you guys have all said. The other thing I want to say is, throughout this document tonight, there have been a number of references by people like Tina Appe and Ariel Dalle and General Manager of Planning, Dan Milburn, who all have stated, look, we have to finally put this down and complete it by the end of December and put it on the website in January. That's actually completely untrue. And I've sent all to you the details. Nothing here has to go onto the website before April of 2022. So what I'm asking you to do, Mayor Little and Council, is reject acceptance of this document. I don't want you to reject your input to it. I'm asking you to reject accepting it until all of the issues in it have been reconciled, and then we can place it when it's in final form in April 2022 on dnv.com, after at dnv.ca, dnv.org, after at least one public hearing. Thank you, Mayor Little.
Thank you, Mr. Colbert. And I think you do raise a very good point, which is, this will be a document that people do refer back to. And although I'm not supportive of having the council edit the document per se and wordsmith the document, it may be a reasonable justification to have an attached letter or preamble produced that reflects a lot of the things I think that were in the verbal report from staff today. I think, Mr. Milburn, you actually did address many of those issues. And so when the report comes forward to council for consideration at a regular council meeting, I think it would probably be healthiest if it came back with that preamble embedded, and possibly some other recognition that this is not attempting to predict how the philosophies of the assembled councillors of mandates will vote in future elections. This is really just a projection of the core data that was provided to us, and maybe just that, an estimate or projection, and council is free to make decisions going forward based on how they interpret that data to be best met, to how to best meet the needs of the community going forward. Mr. Milburn, is that fair to say that like that? And can we perhaps have an adjoining letter? I have no interest in editing the content of the report, but I think an adjoining letter may be helpful.
Thank you, Worship. I certainly think that is very much possible, and we will endeavor to summarize the kind of feedback that we received from council today and contextualize the information that we bring back to council in a regular meeting to fairly reflect that input.
I think that would probably be make the document more reliable for reference in future. But Councillor Bond, do you have a comment?
Yeah, just one comment on the type of housing, the number of bedroom mix. And I think one thing that the report does recommend, and at least in the projection parts that none of us really agree to anyways, that does make sense is the need for more studios and one-bedroom apartments in the district of North Vancouver. And it's a realization of that. In the district, almost half of our households are 1 or 2 bedroom or 1 or 2 person households. Half of the households. So half of the people that occupy a home in the district are a single person or a couple. But in the district, less than 10% of our housing is studios or 1 bedrooms. Less than 10% of the households in the district have 5 people or more. But more than a third of our housing has 4 bedrooms or more. And so I think the projection or the expectation that more smaller homes will be needed in the future is just a realization of that's the kind of households we have right now. And so I think even back in the OCP, there was the reports about empty bedrooms, but here in the district, we are, if it's the right word, over-consuming housing. So there are a lot of people that live in homes that are much larger than, and this was mentioned in the report as well, than is quote unquote needed or suitable according to the definition. The report says that more studios and apartments might better fill that need for single people and couples, which make up half of the households in the district, than our existing housing stock. So I think that's where that number kind of makes sense. It doesn't make sense based on a lot of the narrative around providing family housing or more family housing, especially new multifamily being 3 bedrooms or more, but it makes sense from our existing demographics.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Just wrapping up the discussion tonight. So what will end up happening is that the intent is that this item will return to a regular meeting of council in December. We haven't nailed down the date yet. We'll do the typical advertising ahead of time for a regular meeting of council agenda. And then at that time, there will be an approval process for that. Tonight was really just to have the discussion to better inform staff of our concerns, and also for the council, the staff, and the members of the public have a better understanding of the document as a whole. And I'd say that's been successful. I think just as a closing remark on this, I would say that the census has always been a bit of a challenge, and in modern days, it's become a real challenge. I mean, we wait for super accurate information to come out that is 18 months late, and versus taking something that is a little more moderately accurate, but is you don't have to plot out a projected 18-month escalator in order to be able to come to your number. And I filled out the census. I filled it out online. I filled it out with pull-down boxes and entering numbers in. Why does it take 18 months rather than 18 minutes to put it all together? And so I think that there is an out-of-date philosophy that needs to be uprooted, that you slowly trot out the data, and that your job is to make this release of census data be a 5-year job. We need the data out sooner, and then if we can use automation to do that and then move those people onto more informed specific areas going forward, then fantastic. But trotting out data, the second tranche will be 18 months late. And so everything will be based on an escalator, and so it'll be inaccurate. We'll all know it's inaccurate. We will evolve, but we'll still wait for it. And I find it absolutely frustrating in this day and age when the data is now collected electronically and the information should be readily available almost immediately. It also leaves me suspicious that there's interpretation going on, and I want the raw data to come out of it. So anyway, I just thought I would make that as a final comment. I see a hand has popped up in the interim. Councillor Kern, did you have a final comment?
I just had to get the last word. No, I just happened to have my hand up before you said that. One thing that I didn't ask that was concerning is the way that the projection, and I understand the difference between the projection and our housing needs, but it has owner households and then renter households, and obviously the report then goes into talking, and we understand that we have a need for supportive shelter housing. And I just wondered where that piece falls into the provincial, because I don't know the exact 50 metrics that they asked. So where does that specific need of making sure that the entire continuum from shelter through market, because this is only broken down into those two broad categories?
Looking to staff for a response. Ms. Adva?
Thank you very much through the mayor to Councillor Curran. It doesn't require all of that detail. And I think, however, the requirements for the statements of need maybe could be seen as an indicator of nudging us to pay more attention there, because we know that that's important, but the requirement is not there to have those details around shelter housing types, for example, transitional housing or co-ops.
That just seems like another opportunity for feed. That seems like very, very critical information. So I'm not sure why the province isn't collecting that to see across the province. But yeah, anyway, just a reflection.
Ms. Daly, you were the writer of the report, and we're finally getting to hear your comments at the tail end of the night here. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing more discussion, but I also enjoyed all the discussion we had. And I think Matt, our consultant, has been very immersed in this as well. And he's been involved in many other communities projects as well. So he's a very good broad sense. So I definitely allowed him to answer sort of more of those questions, as he has some really good background. But certainly this is something that I can provide some sort of more information on as we've had that discussion sort of as well. And for Councillor Curran's information, the Statistics Canada information does not include households who are in supportive housing or in care housing, and it's strictly sort of these private households. And so using Statistics Canada information for the projections, we therefore can't conclude anything about supportive housing and care housing from that. Of course, there's other sources and you know, we have data in our housing continuum and that sort of thing, but through these projections themselves, we couldn't make those conclusions at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, council, staff, and members of the public for participating tonight. I look forward to this matter returning in December to hear the final comments from council around the table, and then hopefully receive this document, and hopefully it will help us at the very least be a straw man or something that we can point to and say, actually, I think it should be more this way or more that way. Some people would be more aggressive on rentals if we focused on deep dive affordable rentals versus you know, a passing disinterest at some market rentals in some situations. And so I think it is still at least going to be a part of the conversation going forward, despite the fact that I think some of the projections are people are still having a difficult time wrestling with. But I want to thank everybody for their participation, and I believe our next public meeting is coming up on not on Halloween, is it? No, it's November 1st. So get a good night's sleep the night before on Halloween, and then you can have a council meeting after that. Have a great evening, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.